Hello, everybody. Good night. Today's in Brazil is International Press Freedom Day, and I cannot thank any better guest than my guest tonight, the British woman who fought for human rights, Stella Assange, who has represented many clients, including Julian Assange and the WikiLeaks. She's also very important because she has fought with many journalists internationally, and also she's the wife of Julian Assange, which who she has two children with. And I want to start saying thank you, Stella, for being with us here tonight and to talk about like the situation with Assange, because like I got to know him for first for his work and actually in 2017 with my own person, 2018 I think. And it's really frustrating and outrageous what we have seen a couple of years, what it has been done over the decade actually to Assange. And I would like to start asking you, what do you think about the Trump administration and the Biden administration, what they have done in this period of time of Assange, especially because he's a journalist who put his life in danger and expose all the wrongdoing of the US government. So can we start with that? Thank you for being here with us tonight again.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Well, you're right. The Trump administration and the Biden administration have started something that is extremely dangerous to world press freedom through this prosecution. And if you think back to the publications that Julian's being prosecuted over, they're about Iraq and Afghanistan, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, about Guantanamo Bay and the torture that has been occurring there for 20 years, and also the State Department cables, and a video of a war crime, which WikiLeaks dubbed collateral murder. So this is the material that Julian is being imprisoned for currently without conviction. He's awaiting extradition to face trial for the publication of this information, which is of extraordinary importance. When this material was published in 2010 and 2011, the world said, oh no, it's impossible that the US would prosecute Assange over this material. It's too important. Everyone can see that it's in the public interest. It reveals war crimes. It reveals gross human rights abuses, and so on. And what's happened in the past 12 years? Well, we've, as collectively, the world has gone down an extremely dangerous track. And we're in a much worse position in terms of press freedoms, not just because of what's happened in the interim, but precisely because of this prosecution, which is setting a new precedent. It is setting a new standard by which the United States, which has historically presented itself as the strongest defender of press freedom, and in fact has the gold standard of press freedom protections formally in the world, has now set out to undermine those protections with an outrageous prosecution using a piece of legislation from 1917, which was enacted during the First World War, in order to go after a foreign journalist publishing abroad, publishing about US crimes. And this is such a high-profile case that if they can go after Julian, they can go after anyone at all. And the world is watching, in the sense that I'm not just talking about the public and the outraged observers and journalists who are afraid for their future and liberty. I'm talking about oppressive governments who are taking note and seeing this as, well, licensed to do exactly the same with their dissidents, with their journalists. So it's a race to the bottom now.
Mhm. As you just say, like the U.S. Constitution supposed to protect the press freedom, but here in Brazil we have a constitution that actually protect the journalists who do some kind of work and show the light into those who are doing wrong, especially the governments, like you just said, Julian, and the WikiLeaks have giving us so much information for what the US was doing wrong on those war. They claim they were supposed to be to free people, but what we saw on those documents and the tapes that we saw, it was like actually war crimes. So what do you think about like we have a candidates here in Brazil, Ciro Gomes and Lula. They are actually saying openly and defend Julian Assange. What do you think it would be happening if one of those two win the election here? What that could be for Julian Assange to have asylum here in Brazil?
Well, it's extremely important that there are these vocal shows of support for Julian. And I must say that there's more and more. And it's incredibly important for there to be a growing clamor for his freedom, because the case is political, and the forces that have been able to get the upper hand and bring this outrageous case have to be pushed against in order for Julian to be freed. And there's just no two ways about it. The case is legally outrageous. As I said, Julian's an Australian citizen. He's not American. He wasn't in the United States. The only connection he has with the United States is that he was exposing US crimes. So it's incredibly important that politicians around the world are having the bravery to express their outrage at this prosecution, at what the US is advancing, because it's incredibly dangerous. And even in Europe, I must say that the UN, well, the UN has been vocal about this, special rapporteur on torture, the working group on arbitrary detention, but also the Council of Europe Human Rights Commissioner has written to the Home Secretary of the United Kingdom saying, do not extradite Assange. And also the Commissioner for Freedom of Expression of the OSCE. These are very establishment institutions which are totally opposed to this prosecution, this extradition. So the more vocal expression there is, the greater the growing consensus that this is an international outrage, that it brings Julian one step closer to freedom.
Thank you for that. But let me ask you a little bit more specific. What is the difference that you have seen since like they starting to charge like Julian and put him on the embassy that he could not left for like I think 10 years, 9 years, and then like staying in that like kind of a prison inside the embassy, and then the changes have to go through this place and go now to a prison, because it was actually a prison, but now actually a prison. What do you think that the damage that it can do, like not just like for a journalist, but is your husband, as a human being, this kind of a climate for journalists around the world that can be like staying in a place and it cannot leave. And overwhelmingly, we knew afterwards that they were recording everything that he was doing and the meetings that he was having, and people who they like got close to him and get to talk to him. How do you think that like shows like the power of like the governments have over journalists who are only showing light on their wrongdoing?
Well, it's extremely disturbing what has happened, what has been done to Julian. And one of the most disturbing aspects of it is that there has been a lot of complicity in it's changing now, but now that now that he's in prison, now that it's too late, for journalists should have been extremely sensitive to the political dimension of this case from day one. Everything that happened to Julian that was unusual, it was unusual and unprecedented precisely because of the political dimension. And instead, what we had for many years was some kind of gaslighting of saying, oh no, Julian is just paranoid, the US doesn't want to prosecute him, it's all in his head, and so on. And obviously Julian has been proven right. Unfortunately, we were saying this all along, but it's no consolation. The opposite is true, actually. That I wish we weren't right. But the problem is that a lot of the media was not doing their jobs, and a lot of what we're doing in the UK especially is trying to undo the extraordinary lies that have been told over the years, precisely in order to keep Julian in a situation of legal defenselessness, of basically blaming the victim year after year after year, until he finds himself in a high security prison for 3 years, facing 175 years for publishing the truth. So it's an extremely disturbing development of events that I think need to be analyzed and dissected. Obviously, now is not the moment to I get frustrated sometimes because, and I know that the media landscape in Brazil is different to the UK or to the United States. And sometimes I there's a temptation to just complain about the mainstream press, and then I think, no, the focus has to be on getting Julian out. So I do interviews with the mainstream, and I try not to spend too much time talking about the problems with how this story has been told, but it is a major component in what has happened to, or what has been done to Julian.
Yeah, I can only imagine like the time that me and Glenn spent with him over there. He was very cherry, and like he was hoping that he was going to be able to get out of there and those charges. But let me just ask you, like, do you see any difference from the Trump administration to the Biden administration right now? There's any development like in the conversation about like freeing Assange, or there is no difference at all?
Look, I think the Trump administration, in each of the administrations, the prosecution of Julian has been highly contested internally in the administration issue. So with the Obama administration, we know that they were looking whether they should prosecute him, and they decided not to. And Obama, in fact, commuted Chelsea Manning's sentence. That was a clear political signal: do not prosecute Assange and commute Chelsea Manning's sentence. So Chelsea Manning was freed at the end of the Obama administration. Then Trump came in with a very antagonistic relationship with the press, and leaks were, constant during the Trump administration. He basically took the Obama war on leaks up a level, and so wanted to set a precedent by going after the press, and he did that through the prosecution of Julian, and that was, especially instigated by the CIA's wrath over
Mm-hmm.
WikiLeaks publication of Vault 7. So there, there's even reports about conversation between the FBI head James Comey and Donald Trump saying, well, we need to prosecute journalists. We need a head on a pike, and Julian is that head on a pike. So with the Biden administration, look, Biden was part of Obama's administration. I'm, I know there is a lot of internal disagreement,
Mm-hmm.
and that's an opportunity, and that's reason for hope. That's reason to keep, repeating the message and being louder and louder and getting more and more allies on side calling for this to end. I think also that there's a bit of complacency in the United States. So
Mm-hmm.
they see this as something that's happening in Europe, in the UK. Julian's in prison, and maybe they think the UK, they don't really have to worry about it until he's actually on US soil. But that is then it's too late. The Biden administration has to drop this now,
Yeah.
because once he's on US soil, he is accused under the Espionage Act. There is no defense. There is no
Mm-hmm.
public interest defense. It is the way the administration has interpreted this very broad and vague piece of legislation. It means that if you receive this information, even if it's from a source, you haven't taken
Mm-hmm.
it and you publish it, it's a crime, and he's facing 175 years.
That is outrageous and makes me so angry to hear the situation that we are facing for Julian for all those years. It's impossible to think like the big media are covering this and like putting one of them over in this position. And it get me really angry and frustrated when the big media is just like saying things about Julian and talking about him and not asking for his freedom. Like I don't know how you feel, but it makes me so angry that all journalists around the world should see the threat that that imposes to all of us who wanted to go against powerful people, powerful governments, and wanted to do something to change the narrative and to show exactly what's happening. And I think like they're using Julian as a tool to show we are powerful and we're going to do this to you. Do you think the same way?
Absolutely, and I think there's a kind of there's a problem in the approach that that some journalists take. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I think generally the majority of journalists, I genuinely think that the majority of journalists think this prosecution is dangerous and that Julian should not be in prison. The vast majority. There's maybe a tiny minority of zealots, basically, who would argue, that he should be in prison. But I it would be very hard to find such people, such journalists. The majority think that Julian should be free, but the majority, or I'd say not enough people, are saying it openly. Like it's almost a taboo subject, and maybe it's a taboo subject because uh, there's too much there's too much perceived politics, like
Mm-hmm.
some journalists might think, oh, well, maybe I will seem anti-American, or maybe, you know, whatever. The principles and basically the precedent and the actual case against Julian is not talked about enough, because
Mm-hmm.
if you just bring it down to the facts, then there's no discussion. It would be very hard to find someone to be arguing against the facts. So what you find is a lot of obfuscation, a lot of prejudice, a lot of, layers and layers of, oh, but isn't this the case, and didn't he do this, didn't he say that? And that is precisely what the plan was with, the CIA. We learned in September there was an investigative report by Yahoo News, their investigations team. And it was an incredible report, which revealed that under Mike Pompeo, the CIA had an attack plan, and this attack plan involved a major propaganda effort to remove support from Julian by, putting layers and layers of lies about his motivations are, and all sorts of things, by planting false stories in the media, but also plans about kidnapping him and even assassinating him. So this is part of
Wow.
a deliberate effort
Mhm.
to attack Julian's reputation in order to silence him, in order to put him in
Mhm.
prison, in order to remove political support, in order to prepare the political ground for his incarceration.
Yeah, it's outrageous. Like to try to silence and to destroy some journalist's life who brought like so many information of wrongdoing about the government is just outrageous. And just to say to you, like here in Brazil, Julian is perceived as a hero. And especially for me, he's a hero who stand up and show the truth. And he's paying a really high price for that. And what do you think that we Brazilians can do, and people who's going to be watching this around the world, to push back against these powerful institutions, the governments who still wanted to persecute him and still put him in the jail? What we can do to help you, Stella, and help Julian to get out of the jail and be free from those charges?
Well, first of all, Julian exposed international crimes. He exposed, um, how the United States was meddling in other countries, not just you know their own sovereign self-interest, but even in their judicial processes. In Germany and Italy and Spain, for example, these countries were investigating,
Brazil.
um, and Brazil, yes, exactly. So, Julian has made an enormous contribution
Yeah.
to the Brazilian democracy, to Brazilian people, and he needs the support of the Brazilian people. Um, keep informed about his case. There's a website called don'textraditeassange.com, and it has a take action section. Um, and follow me on Twitter. It's
Mhm.
Stella Morris with one R and then number one. And you know, there are constant actions going on. There are petitions that you can sign, and journalists. There's a website called uh, Journalists Stand. Oh, I have to get that
And
right.
journalists stand with
There's
Assange.
Stands with Assange. I think, yeah.
Yeah.
There's 1,900 journalists who have written, who have signed that, and that group of journalists have written to the Home Secretary of the UK, and journalists can still add their names to that group, and they will also, that group is now mobilized, so that can be used in other further initiatives. So yeah, just stay informed, and you know you can donate to the campaign, and so on.
Okay. Stella, I want to ask you a very personal question, and maybe you don't want to talk about it, but as a father of three children, is like for me, it's impossible not to think that I'm not gonna be around my children. And Julia has been barred to being around and see and raise his two children with you. How that feels for you, and how is Julian feeling about not being able to be the father he wants to be, the example he is for the entire world, and how we see as him as a hero. And I'm sorry if that it's a hard question, but as a father, I I really don't see like myself like not trying my very best to like free Assange just to be with their children.
Well,
It's a hard
yeah,
question. I'm sorry.
it's no, it is. It's hard, you know. Julian he's a wonderful father. Um, we try to maximize the contact that he has with the kids. He speaks to them over the phone. We see him, the kids see him about once a week, sometimes twice a week. But it's always within this very harsh environment of the prison, and the children have to get searched, you know, inside
Mhm.
their mouths, behind their ears, under their feet. And the sniffer dogs, they sniff them, you know, head to toe and front to back. And it's a very oppressive environment, obviously.
Mm,
But once we're there, we're with Julian for a bit over an hour. You know, it's great. We're just like any other family. And maybe, you know, because Julian's a public figure, maybe people might assume that these normal things that they probably have in their lives are accessible to him. But no, Julian has been in a high security prison for over 3 years. He's alone in his cell for you know, 20 plus hours a day. He has little contact with other people. The people he has contact with, he has no control over, you know, the environment, the people, the violence, and so on. And he's just a gentle, intellectual man who who's a publisher and a journalist, and he should
mhm,
be home with his children. But you know, we try to strike a balance of making the kids feel um, secure and when they're with us, but
mhm.
also telling them that there's something very abnormal about this situation, and that Julian wants to come home and he can't, basically.
Mhm. I imagine it's probably very hard. I'm so sorry for that, but I'm in this fight with you and Julian. Okay. Before we end like our conversation, I wanted to thank you again for being so open and talk to us. Here in Brazil, we just have this past week that a journalist from the Guardian, Don Phillips, and another journalist, there is expertise on indigenous people, Bruna Araújo, has been missing because they were doing report on the Amazonia, and the people who were drying and getting things from Amazonia were destroying Amazonia and hunting indigenous people. They were doing like a work over there. I just wanted to send my sympathy for those families, and I wanted to pressure the government, the Bolsonaro government here in Brazil, to keep doing the search, that we need answers about the journalists that are working on the Amazonia right now. But also, Stella, uh, to finish this, I wanted just to say my heart's with you, and all the fight that I'm gonna be able to do, and most of the Brazilians who know this the story that Assange brought to light out with you. So I wanted to thank you again for being in this conversation with me on Day of the Press Freedom here in Brazil. Thank you so much, Stella.
Thank you so much, David.